Hi, and welcome to Depressing Music Week on Song of the Day. That's right, for 7 straight days we're gonna look at really depressing tracks. Um, it's probably gonna get a little emotional, maybe a little intense, a little personal, but this series isn't popular at all, the Song of the Day. So I feel like anybody who's watching this, probably you feel pretty okay about me as a person, and you're not really gonna mock me or attack me if I kind of reveal anything vulnerable or sad. But yeah, things have been very stressful in my life lately, and I don't handle stress well at all. I take it very existentially. I don't really compartmentalize it. I let it affect and spill over into all sorts of areas of my life, which is not good. It's not good. So I was pretty miserable for quite a while. And I also don't handle misery well, in that I typically kind of rush to embrace it, and listen to a lot of depressing music and think about a lot of depressing things. And I don't think that's necessarily terrible. I think, in a certain way, that it allows me a much more emotional and significant connection to music like this and to other depressing media, but it certainly doesn't really help you get out of the depression or anything, so I'm not really recommending it. At any rate, various circumstances have changed. Things are pretty good now, but I wanted to kind of share with you some of the music I kind of turn to in these times, and why I do, and what's so appealing about it to me. So we're starting off with the opening track of the Microphone's wonderful seminal album, The Glow Part 2. This is the first thing I ever heard from Phil Everum, who has now become one of my favorite musicians. I think I heard about it through Pitchfork. Pitchfork loves this album. They gave it Album of the Year in a really glowing review. So I really wanted to check it out. And it's pretty brutal. It's a very sad adult album. It takes a lot out of you emotionally. I would only recommend it in certain moods when you have a clear enough schedule, that you can kind of mope around about it for a while. Phil Elverum, of course, went on to become Mount Erie, which is the artist responsible for my album of the year last year, that we've talked about at some length. So it's quite a legacy of sad music that he's been able to put out. And going back to this earlier stuff, it's quite interesting in comparison to the things he made in the aftermath of his wife passing away. That the latter work has like a much more mature sadness to it, whereas this has kind of an urgent juvenile sadness, that Phil has actually talked about, and we'll talk about some more of this later. A certain interview where he kind of goes back and talks about these old tracks and how he was feeling about them at the time. But that isn't to downplay the effect they have, because they're so well done, they're so beautiful in their own way, that it isn't so much that you're feeling the lack of experience, the lack of like actual significant trauma that isn't haunting his words or anything. You're more just taken back to a time of that sort of emotional simplicity, for lack of a better word, um, and you kind of have your own lack of emotional maturity to get through it. It sort of regresses you in a certain way, I think, such that you're totally filled up with this feeling. So what is the feeling in this case? I want wind to blow. Have you ever had that feeling of just suffocation, of stagnation, um, feeling like you're just kind of drowning in on land? That you feel trapped in your small town, you feel trapped in your classroom or in your office. Um, you feel like not only is this the entirety of your life right now, that all the kind of opportunities and interests and passions have fallen away from you, and you're just in this kind of sterile, stagnant place. But that's going to be it forever. That is just going to be your entire life going forward is going to be in this place of vaguely hostile, total lack of energy, a place where wind is not blowing. Um, so the opening lines are very clever because the Thunderclouds was the band that he was in before with his girlfriend. He broke up with his girlfriend, the band broke up, and the rain dried up, the lightning light up, the clacking shutters just shut up. And all these lyrics basically crying out for some sort of change, something to happen, something exciting, something revitalizing, some energy to flow back into him. I love this, especially the sound of cars, the smell of bars, the awful feeling of electric heat. I really get that. I find that sometimes those sort of environments that he's describing, especially kind of the electric heat, something about that, just it screams for some sort of alternative, that you want to know what is a preferable heat, what is a better source of light, what is the sound that you want to hear. But these things are kind of barely mentioned in the song. There's no breeze, there's no ship on my sea. Like there's kind of this absence without really a concrete replacement. The things that are depressing you are all too real, but you just lack the imaginative energy to even consider the alternative. It's brutal. So it goes on like this. The first few verses are kind of traditionally encountered. The bridge is extremely haunting. This falsetto that just kind of emerges from him and drifts across the whole thing. But it's the ending where I think the real message of the song comes through, which is this long kind of instrumental jam on this one repeated chord progression. Dun 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 dun, and it's kind of goes on, and instruments sort of come and go throughout it, but that one pattern keeps on plotting. And then there's parts where it kind of fades away a little, and you think maybe the song is fading out, but then they kind of just like get back into it. It gets louder again, it gets kind of jauntier, more instruments come in, and just kind of fades out again. And you get this sense that he's just like frustratedly trying to pound out some sort of energy, that he's trying to whip himself up into some sort of frenzy, some sort of motivation, something to cling on to, but it just kind of falls flat, that it falls apart. Instruments kind of abruptly stop at times. It's a really, really great effect, and it goes extremely nicely with the super lo-fi recording setup. Everything is kind of fuzzy and not super polished, which I love. I just kind of love that sound in general, especially when it's a song that kind of has this element of loss or nostalgia, or kind of an absence of feeling. I find that it really fits nicely. That you're almost thinking of the song in like nostalgic terms, that even while you're thinking of it, it's more just kind of reminding you of some performance of it in the past, that you can't go back to anymore, if you can kind of follow me on this. And when you think about the recording process of this song, the reason that the band is called the Microphones is that Phil, after breaking up with his girlfriend, decided to go on solo, to make some music solo. So he kind of envisioned the band as just these microphones that he had set up in this little studio, where I think he was working. Actually, I'm pulling most of this from this podcast type thing called Song Exploder, where they go super in depth into one song at a time. So I would just suggest to check it out. I'm gonna try to like summarize some parts of it that I remember and found interesting, but I would just recommend reading all of it and listening to it too. Actually, I would just recommend listening to it because they play parts of the song, and he talks about, like how he did this and that. So yeah, everything was recorded by him. He recorded them one thing at a time, and then went back and mixed them and layered them. And just kind of this feeling of, especially in the end with that sort of jam, that he's going in and like laying down these drums, these wonderful kind of blown out lo-fi drums, and probably listening to the tracks he's already recorded, and just like really trying to impart that energy, that wind, and kind of going on and on and on until he starts hearing everything else fade out, and then knowing too that part has to fade out. Then coming back in with the acoustic guitar and doing the same thing. Coming back in with oh, I don't know. There's all sorts of instruments and stuff on this. There's like an accordion at one point too, I'm pretty sure. It really has this desperate feel to it, that is so haunting and so beautiful. And again, it's like the sort of distance that you might have from that sort of situation, or from an era in your life where you would feel compelled to do such a thing, doesn't diminish it. Rather, the feeling of being transported back to that emotional time in your life, I think only heightens just kind of its intensity, that you kind of feel like, oh, like this never left me. This never changed. Wind never actually started blowing. I just moved on. Yeah. Anyways, this is what Depressing Music Week is going to be like. Actually, we're just getting warmed up. The next song we're going to talk about is actually the next song on this album. That this is sort of the introduction to. Right after this final instrumental jam, it's kind of kicked the bucket at last. All of these resurgences and efforts to breathe some life into it have failed. What comes next is one of my favorite transitions in all of music.